She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the frosted window, at the black square of night that pressed against the glass. The wind outside had picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin, but Silas knew she wasn't listening to the wind. She was listening for what was in the wind. "Blue coats," she said finally. "Not army. Not anymore. Deserters." Silas's grip tightened on his glass. Deserters were the worst kind of men. Men who had broken their oaths, men who killed for pay or pleasure, men with no flag and no God. 3 of them, she continued, her English broken but clear enough. "They tracked me for 2 days. They want the skins." "What skins?" Silas asked. "Beaver? Otter?" She shook her head weakly. She tapped the leather pouch tied to her waist. It clinked softly. It didn't sound like coins. It sounded duller. "Not gold," she said. "Something else. Something they think is magic. Something they think makes them hide." She looked at Silas, her eyes regaining that lethal intensity he had seen when she first woke up. "They are hunting," she said. "Not for meat, for sport. And they are close. They do not stop for snow." Silas looked at the window. He looked at the heavy oak bolt on the door. He looked at his Winchester. The silence outside was no longer empty. It was waiting. And for the first time in 10 years, Silas realized that the storm wasn't the most dangerous thing on the mountain. Part 3, The Hunters. Morning didn't break. It bruised. The sun failed to pierce the heavy ceiling of clouds, leaving the valley awash in a flat, slate-gray light that offered no warmth and cast no shadows. Inside the cabin, the air was still frigid, the fire banked low to conserve wood. Silas hadn't slept. He sat in his hickory rocker, the Winchester 1873 resting across his knees like a jealous lover. He had spent the long, hollow hours of the night running an oil-soaked rag over the lever action, checking the brass carrier, and counting his rounds. 15 in the tube, 1 in the chamber. It was a lot of firepower for one man, but against 3 rifles, it was just enough to die loudly. Kaya sat near the stove, her injured leg stretched out stiffly before her. She wasn't idle. Her hands, calloused and nimble, were busy braiding a piece of red yarn she had plucked from Silas's Christmas tree into a lock of her hair. It looked like a streak of fresh blood against the obsidian black. It was a death braid, a preparation to meet the Creator. Then the silence of the mountains shattered. It wasn't the wind. It was the rhythmic, muffled thud crunch of shod hooves breaking through the snow crust. Silas moved instantly. He didn't rush, he flowed. He stepped to the frosted window, wiping a peephole with his thumb. "Riders," Silas said, his voice a low rumble in his chest. 3 of them. Coming up the creek bed. They're following the depression where the snow is softer." Kaya tried to stand, her hand instinctively clawing for the skinning knife on the table. As she put weight on her left leg, her knee buckled. She hissed in pain, grabbing the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. "Sit down," Silas commanded, not turning from the window. "You can't run, and you can't fight. In that condition, you're just target practice." "They will burn your house," Kaya said, her eyes wild. "If they find me here, they kill you too. I must leave. I will draw them to the ridge. You step out that door, you're dead in 50 yards. And I don't dig graves in frozen ground." Silas turned from the window. The riders were 200 yards out. He had less than a minute. He moved to the heavy oak dining table in the center of the room. It was a massive slab of rough-hewn timber, built to outlast the apocalypse. Beneath it lay a rug Silas's wife had braided 20 years ago from rags and old shirts. He kicked the rug aside, revealing the bare pine floorboards. To the untrained eye, it was just a floor. But Silas knelt and pressed his thumb into a knot in the wood. A section of the floor, flush with the rest, popped up an inch. He pried the trapdoor open. The smell wafted up instantly, a damp, earthy scent of root vegetables, wet soil, and subterranean cold. The root cellar. It was barely 4 feet deep, dug out to keep potatoes and turnips from freezing in the winter or sprouting in the summer. "Get in," Silas said. Kaya looked down into the black rectangular hole. It looked like a coffin waiting for a body. "It is a grave," she whispered, shrinking back. For a person used to the open sky, the idea of being trapped underground was a horror worse than death. "It's a bunker," Silas corrected, grabbing her arm. "It's the only place in this valley where a bullet won't reach you. Now go." She looked at him, searching for deception. Finding none, she lowered herself into the hole. She groaned as her bad leg took her weight on the ladder, but she made it to the dirt floor. She huddled in the darkness between a bin of sprouting potatoes and a crate of onions. Silas reached into his belt. He pulled out the Colt 1851 Navy revolver. It was an old percussion cap gun, converted to fire metallic cartridges. It was heavy, scarred, and deadly reliable. He handed it down to her, along with the bottle of whiskey. "Don't shoot unless they open this door," he whispered, his face hovering in the square of light above her. "If you hear shouting, you stay put. If you hear shots, you stay put. But if that trapdoor opens and it ain't my face looking down at you, you empty that iron and don't miss." Kaya gripped the cold steel of the revolver. She nodded. Silas lowered the trapdoor. Thump. He waited. The horses stopped outside. The sound of metal bits jingling. The heavy crunching steps of men walking on snow. Bang. 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 A heavy gloved fist pounded the wood. "Open up. U.S. cavalry business." Silas didn't move. He didn't stand. He just wrapped his hands around his coffee mug to stop them from trembling. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline dumping into his blood. "Doors unlocked," he yelled, his voice sounding older and more frail than he was. "If you're friendly." The latch lifted. The door swung inward, bringing a blast of freezing wind and swirling snow into the warm room. 3 men stepped over the threshold. They wore the blue wool of the United States Army, but the uniforms were wrong. Tattered cuffs, missing buttons replaced with twine, yellow cavalry scarves stained with tobacco juice and grease. They didn't carry standard-issue Springfields. They carried a mix of repeaters and shotguns. Silas knew the look. He had seen it after the Civil War. These weren't soldiers. These were deserters. Men who had walked away from the fort to hunt for gold, furs, or blood. They were wolves wearing the skin of sheepdogs. The leader was a tall man, gaunt as a winter wolf, with a jagged white scar running through his left eyebrow, pulling his eyelid into a permanent skeptical squint. He stepped into the room, his spurs jingling, a sound meant to intimidate. He looked around the cabin with eyes that missed nothing. He saw the fire. He saw the pathetic Christmas tree with its flower-dipped pine cones. He saw the Sears catalog. Finally, he looked at the old man sitting at the table. "Cozy," the leader sneered, his voice scratching like sandpaper. He sniffed the air loudly. "Smells like injured animal in here. Copper. Blood." Silas didn't blink. "Smells like wet dog," he said, nodding toward Boots, who was growling low in his throat from the corner. and uninvited guests who forgot to wipe their feet. The leader's eyes narrowed. He laughed, a short, barking sound devoid of humor. He walked further into the room, his muddy boots leaving streaks on the clean floor. He walked right up to the table. Silas felt his heart hammer against his ribs. The man stopped. He was standing directly on the braided rug. Directly over the trapdoor. Directly over Kaya's head. Under the floorboards, in the absolute dark, Kaya held her breath. She could hear the creak of the wood as the heavy boots shifted above her. A fine rain of dust and dirt sifted down from the cracks, landing on her cheek. She didn't brush it away. She gripped the Colt Navy with both hands, pointing it straight up at the wooden ceiling, her finger resting on the trigger guard. Not yet, she told herself. Not yet. Above, the leader leaned his hip against the table, looming over Silas. "We're tracking a runner," the leader said casually, picking up the slice of vinegar pie Silas had left on a side plate. He sniffed it, made a face of disgust, and tossed it onto the floor. Boots lunged for it, but Silas snapped his fingers and the dog held back. "Squaw," the leader continued, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Shot her yesterday up on the ridge. Good hit. Lot of blood. Trail ends near your creek." "Haven't seen a soul in 3 days," Silas lied. His face was a mask of bored irritation, the face of a hermit who hated company. "Storm covered everything. If she's out there, she's dead. Coyotes are probably picking the bones by now." "Maybe," the leader said. He leaned closer, invading Silas's personal space. He smelled of stale sweat, unwashed wool, and rot-gut whiskey. Or maybe some bleeding heart took her in, thinking they were doing a Christian deed. The second man, a short, rat-faced soldier holding a double-barreled shotgun, was poking through the pile of furs in the corner. "Nice pelts, old man," the rat-faced one called out. "Beaver. Prime winter coat. Worth a few dollars in Laramie." "Leave them," Silas warned, his hand moving an inch closer to the trigger of the Winchester. "Those are spoken for." The leader's gaze snapped to the rifle on the table. He smiled. It was a predatory grin, showing yellow teeth. "You got a lot of lip for a man living alone in the middle of nowhere," the leader said softly. "You know the penalty for harboring a hostile, old man? It ain't a fine. It's treason. I could hang you from that pine tree out front and burn this shack to the ground. Nobody would ever know. We'd write it up as an Indian raid." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The dust motes dancing in the shaft of light from the window seemed to freeze. Silas looked up, locking eyes with the man. He didn't stand. He didn't shout. He spoke with the quiet, terrifying certainty of a man who has already accepted his own death. "You could try," Silas said. "But take a look at this table. That's a Winchester 1873, chambered in .44-40. Hammer's back. My finger is inside the guard. At this range, I don't need to aim. I'll blow a hole in your gut the size of a dinner plate before you clear leather." He nodded to the rat-faced man in the corner. "And my dog, he's trained to go for the throat. He'll rip your friend's jugular out before he gets that scattergun leveled." Silas leaned forward slightly, the wood of the chair creaking. "So, Captain, you might get me. You might burn this house. But you won't leave this mountain walking. You'll die screaming in the snow, holding your intestines in your hands. Is she worth it? Is a dead woman worth dying for on Christmas morning?" The leader stared at Silas. He looked for fear. He looked for a bluff. He saw neither. He saw the flat, dead eyes of a man who had seen too much war to be impressed by uniforms. Under the floor, Kaya thumbed the hammer of the Colt back. Click. The sound was tiny, muffled by the thick oak table and the rug. But in the silence of the room, it might as well have been a cannon shot. The leader flinched. His eyes darted down to the floor. Silas didn't breathe. Did he hear it? The leader looked back at Silas, then at the rifle. He calculated the odds. He looked at his men. They looked uneasy. They wanted loot, not a death match with a crazy hermit. Let's go, the leader spat, stepping back from the table. He stepped off the rug. She's frozen stiff and adrift somewhere anyway. Waste of time. He turned toward the door. As he passed Boots, he lashed out with a vicious kick, his heavy boot connecting with the old dog's ribs. Boots yelped and skittered across the floor. Silas's finger whitened on the trigger. The barrel of the Winchester tracked the leader's back. One shot. Spine. It would be so easy. But he held. If he shot now, it was war. And Kaya was still in the hole. Merry Christmas, Grandpa, the leader sneered. The door slammed shut. Silas didn't move. He sat like a stone statue, listening. He heard the crunch of snow, the creak of saddle leather, the snort of horses. He waited until the sounds faded, until the only noise was the wind and the whimpering of his dog. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Only then did he exhale, a breath shaking so hard it rattled in his chest. He stood up, his legs trembling, and shoved the heavy oak table aside. He threw back the rug and ripped open the trapdoor. Kaya was staring up at him from the darkness, the Colt navy pointed straight at his face. She lowered it slowly. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat. "You lie well for a white man," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't lie," Silas grunted, reaching down to pull her out of the grave. "I just didn't tell them the truth. There's a difference." He pulled her up into the light. She looked at the door, then at him. For the first time, she didn't look at him like a stranger. She looked at him like kin. "They will come back," she said. "I know," Silas replied, checking the action on his rifle. "But next time, we won't be answering the door." Part 4, The Brain Tanning. The storm broke 2 days later, but Kaya couldn't leave. The fever had come and gone, but the leg needed time. And Silas needed help. Winter was the season of hunger, but it was also the season of harvest. The trapline he had checked before the storm had yielded 4 beavers and a large buck deer. Silas dragged the buck into the lean-to attached to the cabin. He began skinning it, his knife working with practiced dullness. He intended to salt the hide and sell it to the trader in the spring for 50 cents. Maybe buy some coffee. Kaya hobbled out, leaning on a crutch Silas had fashioned from a pine branch. She watched him work. She shook her head. "You waste it," she said. Silas looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Waste what?" "I'm taking the meat. I'm taking the hide." "You make rawhide," she said, spitting the word like it was an insult. "Hard. Useless. Good for shoe soles. Nothing else. It's all I know how to do." Kaya moved closer. She took the knife from his hand. "I show you. You save my life. I make you rich." What followed over the next 3 weeks was not just labor. It was a lesson in chemistry that no university in the East could teach. Kaya explained the principle of brain tanning. "The spirit of the animal gives the solution," she explained as Silas cracked open the skull of the deer. The brain has the oil. The fat that likes water. Silas didn't know the word lecithin, but he watched as Kaya mixed the mashed brain with warm water until it looked like a pale, frothy soup. Then came the work. Silas had thought he was a hard worker. He was wrong. Kaya drove him like a drill sergeant. Step 1: Fleshing. They spent hours scraping every ounce of meat and membrane from the hide using a sharpened bone tool Kaya made. "If you leave fat, it rots," she scolded. Step 2: The soak. They rubbed the brain mixture into the hide. Kaya worked it with her bare hands, massaging the emulsified fats deep into the collagen fibers. It was messy, visceral work. Step 3: The breaking. This was the day Silas almost quit. The hide began to dry. As the water evaporated, the fibers wanted to glue themselves back together into hard rawhide. To prevent this, the hide had to be stretched constantly. For 6 hours, they stood on opposite sides of a smooth wooden post. Silas pulled. Kaya pulled. They dragged the hide back and forth, breaking the fibers, forcing them to stay open and soft. Sweat poured down Silas's back. His arms burned. "Rest," he gasped. "No," Kaya shouted. "If you stop, it hardens. We lose." They worked in a rhythm. Pull. Grunt. Pull. Grunt. It was a dance of exhaustion. But in that struggle, something shifted. They weren't strangers anymore. They were a machine, a team. Silas looked at Kaya, her jaw set, her eyes fierce, and felt a respect he hadn't felt for another human being in 20 years. When the hide was finally soft, white, and fluffy as flannel, Kaya wasn't done. She sewed it into a bag and hung it over a smudge fire of rotten wood. "Why?" Silas asked. "The smoke locks the spirit," she said. "Without smoke, water makes it hard again. With smoke, it stays soft forever." The aldehydes in the smoke penetrated the leather, waterproofing the collagen. The finished buckskin flowed like velvet in Silas's rough hands, smelling of wood smoke and wildness. Kaya didn't just teach him a trade, she gave him silence. Trading his heavy boots for her handmade moccasins, Silas moved across the floor without a sound. "You gave me my legs back," he marveled. Kaya smiled gently. "You gave me my life back." Winter became a sanctuary. Between reading the Sears catalog and learning the language of crows, Silas dared to imagine a future where he wasn't alone. But the spring thaw brought a sudden, empty silence. One morning, Kaya was gone. She left no note, only a fortune in tanned hides and an eagle feather amulet. In the territory, goodbyes were a luxury for those sure of return. "Safe travels, girl," Silas whispered to the melting tracks.